Hello and welcome to Breaking Embargo. I'm Peter Barnes. That's Cristo Foufas. Let's get into it. Cristo, thank you so much for joining us. It is an absolute privilege. You are one of my favorite people I've ever worked with. I genuinely mean that. And I wrote a very nice thing about you that everybody thought I was being held under duress because I wrote something nice about somebody. But how are you doing? You okay?
You say that to all of your guests, don't you?
I
You
don't.
love them, and they're
I
all your
genuinely
favorite.
don't. I'm not Bruce Forsyth. I'm not that much of a caricature just yet.
Really? Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you very much indeed for
Good.
asking.
That's great.
Very happy to be broadcasting with you again.
I know, yeah. Those, what was it, 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning,
Yes,
Sundays and Saturdays. My Lord, what were we thinking?
5 a.m. starts. I kind of miss those 5 a.m. starts, so I miss that show a little bit. But it's nice to
Yeah,
be other things and actually having a little bit of a lie-in as well, which is nice.
that's, yeah, always nice. But anyway, let's get straight into it. Like, you've been, for me, Christo, you've always had your kind of, a great sense of where the country feels and a great sense of understanding about what people genuinely care about. I think is what makes you such a good broadcaster and such a good host of any of these kind of shows, because you can actually empathize with people as people like me don't. But what I will say is, from my perspective, I look at policy failures, I look at things in kind of facts and figures. But where do you think the country feels that it's going wrong? Because it's evidently clear that most believe that that is the case. Where do you think what's the root of it? Because I don't think it's the surface level politics stuff. I think it's something deeper, but I can't really put my finger on it.
I think it's more than one thing, actually. I think it is partly the surface level politics, in as much as we have the problem. It's almost like the problem is democracy, in as much as we have had governments of, I would say, probably the last 30 or so years that really have ruled in 4 or 5 year cycles. And that's been their goal. We haven't had long-term strategic planning. I don't think since Thatcher, actually. I think that she was very much that in 1979, love or loathe her, and there are many people that justifiably, I think, have both opinions. She had a strategy that was beyond getting to the 1983 election. She had a strategy that would fundamentally long-term change Britain, for some for the better, some for the worse. But that was a long-term strategy, which was in many ways carried on by Major. I think since 97, we've had very much sort of 4 year cycle type governments that have tried to get things looking great on the surface, but haven't actually managed to make things, I think, better on the ground. I think one of the most fundamental problems that we've had in the last 30 years, and I don't say this trying to be reformy, I don't say this trying to talk about immigrants in the slightest, because I'm a son of an immigrant. I'm the son of someone that would come to a country who would want to make a better life for themselves. I completely understand that, and I completely am friends and am adoring of people who want to better their lives. But unfortunately, the immigration policy, population policy versus infrastructure, and GDP versus GDP per capita, the economy doing better versus the economy doing better per person on the ground, none of those things have aligned for about 30 years. And I think that has led to a massive problem that we now have with infrastructure, a massive problem that we now have with a lack of resources in order to accommodate the population. I think it's led to some cultural problems, which I don't think are as great as some people make out, but I think they're absolutely there. I think it's led, most notably out of all of those, though, is I think it's led to I would say almost an underclass, for want of a better word. I don't love that word, but a disenfranchised, probably working class population and lower middle class population, what you would probably call the backbone of Britain, many of whom feel completely, as I say, disenfranchised, disenchanted, and who haven't seen any of the improvements that have been part of those
Mm.
the 4 year short-term cycles of the
Yeah.
last 30 years.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, really. The word I use is disillusioned.
Yeah.
That's how I define them. That, like, they haven't seen the change, and this is one thing that, from a messaging perspective, I think politicians struggle with is they're looking at spreadsheets with things that are trending up. They're thinking that this is wonderful, but they're not translating that to the people on the street. The people on the street aren't feeling the trend in an upwards direction, and I think that's where the real disconnect is coming from. Is the spreadsheet isn't matching what people feel, and they're neither. I think the public have a responsibility in this as well to kind of meet in the middle at parts to say, look, yeah, we get that this is getting better, but we need more. And politicians have to say that, look, that we have made things better, but we've got to do more. I
But
think,
the problem is they've not made things better in as much as they've
yeah.
made things better, as you say, on a spreadsheet.
Mm,
But I think the reason you said those kind words at the start, that I am now perceived to be someone who gets it more,
mm,
is because I was one of those people. Brexit was a really big
mm.
turning point for me in
Yeah,
my,
I'd love to have known you back then, actually. Because
yeah, because
we only ever met after Brexit, so after your what do you got, like your Damson conversion.
well, I mean, I still don't
Yeah.
think that the Brexit was the correct answer, but it
Mm,
was the answer the only people had was to the
yeah.
question that they had. So
That's
it
the
was
point I make.
the,
Yeah,
the
I say
right
that.
question. But up until that point, I had, although I've always sort of considered myself ideologically centre right, I really kept quoting in my broadcasting career. I kept quoting the fact that, look, what are the EU laws you don't like?
Mm,
What about GDP? Look at the GDP that immigration has given us. Why
mm,
aren't we getting all of this? What's wrong with you, kind of thing? Until I sort of realised and had this, like you say, conversion that that it wasn't making people's lives better on
better. Yeah.
the ground, and that actually we could talk about GDP till we're blue in the ears, and we could talk about the economy growing, and we could talk
Mm,
about all of this stuff, but GDP is actually the economy growing and companies getting more wealthy that would be a part of that, and the population increasing, but it wasn't actually translating to people on the ground. And so it was that made me sort of, I think, shut
mm,
up and listen a bit more to people,
mm.
um, and sort of starting to just get it a bit more in general, and also learning that this slightly sneery Remainer type broadcasting and attitude, though it was making me feel a bit better,
Mm.
wasn't actually uh, um, creating any sort of middle ground
Yes.
that people, and being able to have a discussion with people about what actually were their concerns. And
Mm.
generally, I think people's concerns is when they say immigration. What annoys me about the immigration debate is many
Mm.
people think you mean immigrants. Now,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
there are some immigrants that haven't aligned. There are some immigrants that don't speak English. There are some immigrants that have played the system. That is without a doubt true. But if you were to say to people, my audience at Talk, the audience I
Mm.
speak to, the audience I speak to at LBC, if you say to so many of those people, okay, but what about the immigrants you know? They'd say, oh my God, I love them. Oh, I love that guy. Oh, the Bulgarian,
Mm.
I really like him. Oh, I'm good with them. Oh yeah, my daughter married, a Greek guy, a Russian guy, whatever.
Mm.
They're usually all right. It's immigration policy
Yeah.
that they have actually got a problem with, and
Yeah.
infrastructure policy. And the people to blame
Mm.
is governments, successive governments that have failed them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the disconnect between certain kind of government policies is staggering. Like when I first started working in Westminster, we were always told about joined up government, that everything worked together for an end goal. Usually it could be economic growth or it could be for a particular policy end. And the problem we have now is that doesn't exist. It's just individual satellites trying to piece things together. And often the bigger problem is they're all competing against each other for resources and they're not working together. There is no single vision. I think that's what we miss most in the politics we have in this country. No one on the left or the right can really say they have a vision about what the country should look like. And I think without that, I think a lot of things are falling by the wayside, but you're right on the immigration point because I think this has really come to a head because of the Southport attack. I grew up not far from Southport. We used to go on like bank holidays and all that kind of thing, and it's a very kind of typical British town, for want of a better phrase. It's got a great history. It's got great people. I actually really like going. It is a nice place to go. But what happened there and the government response to it, I think lends perfectly into your argument of the sneering, of the way that they used the apparatus of the state to paint anybody who may have had a problem with the issues of immigration as these far right thugs that grew out of that attack, I think was despicable. I think Keir Starmer disgraced the office that day. I thought it was one of the worst speeches I've ever heard and the most tone deaf speech I've ever heard. The fact that that speech should have been about 3 dead children and how the country is mourned and a terrible attack, he used it as a weapon. And I don't think he should ever be forgiven for that because I think the damage that caused is why everybody's at each other's throats. It's not the sole reason, but I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
I think Southport was actually the perfect storm, and it actually could have been anything that created the reaction to Southport. And I don't say that glibly, could have been anything, because obviously it was the murder of 3 girls and the violent attack of so many others, the most heinous and horrific of crime. But what I am saying is that it was the straw that broke the camel's back in a public that felt that there had been a failure of the state repeatedly and consistently when it came to, I think, their reaction being that it was Islamic terror. And that is another area, I think, that has created a huge amount of tension when it comes to people feeling disenfranchised and disillusioned. Because people call it far right. People say that, this was awful, that people presumed it was Islamic terror. Well, firstly, there was an Al-Qaeda element.
Yeah.
Wasn't considered terrorism at the time and nor during the trial, but there was that element to it with the handbook that was found. But if we put that aside, the idea of someone, a lone wolf, going in some way crazy, violent, or whatever, and killing a load of children, seemingly completely unprovoked in a random attack, well, it's not completely beyond the realms of sanity and possibility to think, well, that sounds exactly like other terror attacks that have been perpetrated on behalf of a radical Islamic ideology that has been perpetrated against the United Kingdom. So it's not that, so the fact that people were just so horrified that that was the conclusion that was jumped to by people, I always found a bit perplexing, because that has happened.
Yes.
It's absolutely happened before. And that is, again, a failure of state. That's a failure of government to have kept people safe. And how many times have we seen in the past people who have been known to the government who have then gone on to perpetrate similar sorts of attacks that were actually terror attacks, and it wasn't considered a terror attack. So that's why people were angry, and they were absolutely wrong to be attacking at hotels with asylum seekers or attacking people who are non-white. I don't want to live in a country like that. But what was so frustrating about Keir Starmer's response was firstly the double standard, in as much as that he seemingly thought it was okay to prejudice any court act against those people by immediately calling them far right.
Yeah.
Number one. But number two, what is so perplexing and very much ties into what we were just discussing about this sneering lanyard class, I heard them being called over the weekend.
Oh, yeah, I like that phrase. I've heard that one before. I have to admit, I like that one.
Lanyards and focus groups and stuff, was the idea that in any, we've seen violent disorder in many, many different ilks before. Let's look at the Black Lives Matter protests. Let's look at some of the other protests that we might have seen. Let's even look at Islamic radicalization. Let's look at people who have been radicalized. If you're attacking someone for their race on a street and being violent, you have been radicalized. And in any other incident like that, look at knife crime. Again, any other incident like that, the first reaction of those people who are probably of the ilk of the Prime Minister of Keir Starmer is, well, you can't just criminalize these people. You've got to look at what contributed to the point that got them to where they are.
Yes.
What radicalized them? When you talk about knife crime, of course, people say, look, it's criminal, it's awful, throw the book at them. But then but then you will get an element of people that say, well, actually, no, it's not just about criminalizing them. It's public health. It's the fact there are no role models. It's the fact that there's gang culture. It's the fact that they want to have Gucci for social media. It's the fact that they're not very educated. It's the fact there aren't Sure Start centers. Well, there's all sorts of there's a holistic approach to looking at how someone got to where they are. Whereas with those attacks, it was just you're far right, get you in prison,
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. For me, it was always the idea that if it was, say the Black Lives Matter thing or any other kind of protest, it was always a small minority. It was always explained away. This was everybody who has even once thought about it is a far-right fascist or a thug and all the rest of it. There was no kind of attempt to even walk through the door of the conversation that you've just described there. And I think that's what we missed. And I think we're seeing it now with the rape gangs as well. I think that's a key.
With the issues that got someone to riot isn't condoning what they're doing. You're not condoning knife crime by saying, because I agree, by the way, when we look at knife crime, we shouldn't just say, look, it's a criminal thing. It is a criminal thing. And of course there should be punishment. But I agree, we should say, well, look, there are factors that got someone to the point where they're radicalized into carrying a knife. And we should look at those as well, because that's how you solve problems. That's how you solve problems in society. Black Lives Matter, that was absolutely awful, the riots and the disorder that got there, but everyone was queuing up to say, well, look, it's not just about riots, it's about people feeling repressed, it's about police and their relationship with the black community. There's all sorts of reasons that got people to that point. We should do that as a society because that's intelligent, that's a smart approach to trying to solve problems. But when it came to this, there was absolutely none of that whatsoever. There was no attempt to understand why people had got to the point where they had been radicalized into such horrific violence. And I think that that's absolutely shameful, but also stupid, because the problem is now just simmering away and might well bubble up again in another way without addressing.
But then I always say to the people that did riot, you gifted them the narrative that they wanted. They wanted this kind of uproar, this kind of the kind of reaction, because they were able to then, in my opinion, implement certain policies and ideas and had a justifiable framework to which they could do it. You know, the way that the entire justice system was able to move at such speeds. You know, we haven't seen probably since the last set of riots. You know, and it was the way that they were able to use the apparatus of the state with kind of wanting. There's nobody checking whether they were allowed to do half the stuff that they did.
I don't mind that. There have been many periods in history where the state has done that. So there is a precedent for that. They did it with Black Lives Matter. They did it with the 2011 riots. They did it in Toxteth and Brixton
that's true.
under Thatcher. Yeah. But Thatcher actually then commissioned I think it was I can't remember the name of the report that was commissioned by Thatcher to look at the reasons as to why the Brixton riots actually took place. It's not Macpherson. That was the Stephen Lawrence report.
I think it was
the Scarman report. So again, in 2011, there's huge riots then. But actually, look, it was disillusioned. It was because of austerity. It was because of all these reasons that got there. So I don't mind the state flexing its muscles and saying, look, people have rioted, they need to be dealt with. But also then the state, once they've done that, needs to say, right, okay, we've dealt with the criminal element now. What got us here? Why did they get? And there has been none of that after Southport.
Yeah, that's true. And I think the reaction of Yvette Cooper, I thought, was very telling of this. When it was just a few weeks before you had those riots in Leeds, just outside of Leeds, I think it was Horsforth. And then though her reaction to that was much more of an understanding, meeting community leaders, all that kind of stuff. This was a very different reaction. And I think that's when this kind of two-tier narrative really did start to take hold. I do think that's the one moment, I think, when people start to wonder, where did this all come from? It was that. And I think it was the perfect example of it.
And that also goes back to the point I sort of made at the start with cultural tensions that there are. And we've almost become, I think in this country, we've almost become hoisted by our own petard in as much as that people want to come here because we are, I think in general, we were a brilliant nation where we all do pretty much rub along together. We all
Mm,
do get along. I don't care what you are. I care about the content of your character, whether you're
mm,
prepared to work, whether you've got a bit of nous about you, whether you've got a bit of ambition. That's what I care about, and I think that that's what Britain was built on. But that's in the last 20 or 30 years, alongside all of those issues that I outlined
mm,
at the start, also something quite insidious and weird has happened with the concept of equality as well, because it
mm,
used to be about making people who were repressed, whether that be because of their sexuality, because of their race, because of whatever it might be, it was about raising them to the level of
mm.
the majority of people when it came to legal rights, when it came to protections, when it came to attitudes. But in the last 20 years, it didn't come about making people raise them to the level of the
Mm.
majority. It became about making the majority feel bad
Yes.
about their existence. I don't
Yeah.
want, as a gay person, a straight person, to be considered that they have straight privilege and to make them feel
Mm.
bad about being
Yeah.
straight. I don't want that. I don't want a white person to feel terrible about the fact that they are white. But that's something that's also happened in the last 20 years. And there's been also this huge, I think, and again, it's what's so annoying is it kind of comes from a good place, but
Mm.
this absolutely paranoid fear of calling out any kind of bad behavior from people who might come from a minority for fear of upsetting that minority, which has actually led to worse tensions, ironically, than
Yeah.
had something just been done. So something when it comes to the equality debate,
Mm.
when it comes to all of those things, something's gone very wrong with that as
Yeah.
well.
For me on that point, I always think it's the two concepts. One, the concept of privilege, I feel has has been used to silence criticism of things. You say you're not allowed to talk about that. I think that it has denied empathy, and it is kind of boxed us off. Like we have become more siloed. They say you're that bit, and you're that bit. But the second one, and I think this lends into what you're saying. So every disparity is discrimination. It's not that there's just natural differences between different groups of people. It's that difference is because that group was stopped from doing it. It was done out of
Yeah.
bigotry or hatred. I think that mentality of the differences between people can't just be natural. They're because of society. They're because of this grand evil thing. And I think when you get the idea that everything is against you, I think that the victim complex, I think, is a very dangerous place, and our society got hooked on it. It got hooked on it,
I
and
think it's a
yeah,
horrible thing to say
yeah,
to people as well that because
mm,
you know what, racism, homophobia, sexism, and all of those things, they exist. I absolutely believe that they exist. And part of it is the fight against it. Part of it is
mm,
saying, look, in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of people's attitudes, we all should be equal, right? But also part of the fight against it is building up the resilience to go, you know what, screw them.
mm,
You know
yeah,
what? I know I've not got jobs because I'm gay. I know I have. I
mm,
know for a fact. I know that I've been told to sort of tone it down in previous jobs. I've done all of those sorts of things, and I've had to go. Okay, well, I just got to carry on. I just got to keep going. I've got to just dust myself off. Got to keep going because otherwise, I will get consumed by this idea of victimhood. And does that mean that victims don't exist?
mm,
No. You know what? You've got to sometimes you've got to keep going
yeah.
forward. It's got to keep just take the next step. And I worry that we give a message to people that actually it's so bad out there. There's no point even trying.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's like a great note to end on. Really, is that you've got to carry on. Like the lack of resilience is. Oh God, we could do like a 3 hour one on that. Really, of these, it's ridiculous. Like I know we actually had a great conversation about the lack of risk in society. That was one of my favorite episodes we did together about how we've removed risk and we've
You know,
protected people.
that's
And
another
it's
thing
a
to think
crazy
about.
idea, really. But yeah,
And
you're right,
it's the sort of
100%.
craziness of the state in as much as like we are going to solve every problem that you face, and we are going to try and legislate every single problem that
Yes.
you face. Like if I might walk to the edge of a cliff and throw myself off it. The answer is to tell me that that would be a stupid idea not to put fences on that cliff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what's going to end up happening.
Yeah. No, it's a perfect analogy for it. Yeah. I think. It's one of those things that I started this podcast because I wanted to find solutions. And I think this one is one that society has to do itself. Like it has to do this itself. It has to suddenly start rejecting bad ideas, but also start embracing risk, start embracing just moving forward. We spend so much time introspecting that I think we actually realize that we're quite dull, and because of that we invent things to make it seem more interesting. But
And I think
it's incredible to me.
that we've got, this is probably the note to end up, but I think that it's taken us 30 years to get here. We need someone with the political kahunas to say it's a 30-year plan to get us out of this.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We need to train people to do different jobs. We need to make certain jobs that don't pay. We need to stop relying on foreign labor when it comes to certain kinds of jobs that we don't see as British, that we look down our nose on. We need to build infrastructure for the people that are here. We do need to build houses, but we need to make sure that they go to the right people. We need to make sure that people have the resilience to want to go forward. It's going to take
Yeah.
30 years if we have a chance, I think, of getting us back to a place where work pays, you're not taxed through the hill, you have motivation, you feel like you want to do better for yourself, you can afford to live, you can afford to buy a house, wages are good enough, and we are in a society that we want to live in. And I really fear that that is not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, it seems like an awfully depressing point to finish on,
I'm
but I feel
sorry,
like
I know you
that's
want to
very
leave.
us. I feel like that's very us, if I'm being brutally honest. But honestly, Christo, this has been brilliant. It's one of the reasons I've always loved working with you and talking with you is your ability to broaden out these issues, to actually get to the core of things. Like this, like you say, silver bullet politics is what I call it. This kind of everything will be fixed with this one thing. No, it won't.
No
But
way.
again, thank you so much.
I know. Can I give you another note to end on then? My
Yeah.
partner, who is here upstairs, he is from the Middle East, right? And honestly, we laugh because actually, do you know what? And this will be the note we end on. They don't have many democracies in the Middle East, and some of these places, Saudi Arabia and all of those, they don't have many of these democracies. But I tell you something, they have 30-year plans because they know they'll be in
Oh
power.
yes,
And that's why they build airports in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's why they have up. So maybe actually you wanted a positive solution to end on. I'll give you one: dictatorships.
Right, that's definitely going to be the clip. Anyway, thank you again, Christo. This was wonderful. Please do join us next time.